Gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the witnesses and the work that you are doing. I have three different questions. First to FEMA, Mr. Long. The disaster recovery program, the disaster response, you have adjusted the cost-sharing requirements for disaster aid for Texas and Florida as a result of the recent hurricanes. California has had a recent disaster. Do you intend to also adjust for California the cost-sharing requirements for the emergency aid?
So it depends. There's a couple things. The 90-10 cost share is triggered, and then there's a formula that's set forth by PCEMA, the Post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act. And here again, I can submit specifically to you how that formula works. But basically, if I remember correctly, if the damage cost is $140 per person for the entire population of California, then PCEMA basically triggers the 90-10 cost share.
We'll work with you on that. The disaster recovery program. A couple of our colleagues have already raised this question about past presidential disasters and FEMA's IOUs to state and local government for the federal cost share in the recovery, and that's infrastructure repair and so forth. Do you intend to request in the upcoming emergency appropriation bill sufficient money to cover past presidential declarations and the local and state recovery money that is owed to them?
Right now, I don't have an understanding of the issues specifically that you're referring to.
It's been raised by three of my colleagues here, and this has to do with past emergencies declared by the president in which the local governments have put up their 25% and have paid for the recovery, various infrastructure, and FEMA has yet to pay the 75% federal share of that recovery work.
I'd be happy to look into it.
If you would, we think there's about $5 billion owed to the state of California for past presidential declarations. Okay. You heard from Texas just a moment ago, and similarly, most every state where there has been a presidential declaration. My understanding is what has happened is you've had little enough money to deal with the emergencies and the response to the emergencies, and therefore you have delayed payment on these IOUs. So if you would look into that, I would appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Coast Guard, you're at about $1.8 billion in infrastructure damage as a result of the hurricanes. Is that correct?
Congressman, as a result of the hurricanes, this season here, and maybe a little carryover, about $70 million from 2016. And Matthew, I'd say we're about $1.1 billion, $1.2 billion, somewhere in that range.
Okay. How do you expect to get that money?
Well,
to
sir,
rebuild the infrastructure? This is infrastructure that is being used that has been damaged, in some cases not even available for use?
Yes, sir, Congressman. There's more than 40 facilities that have been damaged here in the recent round of storms. We, at the request of OMB, through our parent department, Department of Homeland Security, have submitted our needs. That number is, again, a number north of $1 billion. It is working through the department. I'm not sure if it's left the department.
I believe you've also submitted information to the subcommittee of this, the Coast Guard Maritime Subcommittee of this committee, yes, and we'll work with you on trying to secure that funding. And it's out there. You've also had an extraordinary expense in the immediate emergency response. How much have you spent in the immediate emergency response for the three hurricanes?
Well, so like I said, that number, that billion-plus number there, there's about $500 million that I believe is actual hard facility costs. There was some damages to our aircraft. There's other wear and tear type things. There's personnel costs in there. That collectively gets you to that number that's north of
ongoing operational cost of what I'm referring to.
Ongoing operational costs, sir?
Yeah. Well, here's my point is that my understanding from the information that we have received is that the Coast Guard has spent into its annual appropriations to deal with the emergencies, and you may have a shortfall for the remainder of the current fiscal year. And
yes, sir.
I'm curious how you're going to backfill, or if you need to backfill that amount of money. If so, then we need to know so that when the new emergency appropriation bill goes through, that we include in that bill the Coast Guard.
Yes, sir. I think if you look at, sir, where we were at the close of a fiscal year, and at the end of September, to 1 October, we deferred things on our operating and maintenance costs. We deferred a $7 billion contract to replace 19 small operational boats. We had to make decisions as you close out the fiscal year, and there's, a responsible way to do that. So there are some things. There's deferred maintenance, and that stuff plays forward. And we can work with you, sir, on those specifics.
We would appreciate specific information so that we can work on the appropriation, the emergency appropriation. Finally, I'm really curious how we're going to pay for all of this. I believe we just made a major move here in this House to significantly reduce the federal revenues. It's called tax cuts. I'll let it go at that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. With that, recognize Dr.